Hello and welcome to yet another installment of Flesh and Blood Data. Today we're going to be covering the constructed format, and I'm going to specifically be diving into Iyslander and Dash to have a bit of a look how they're doing in the current metagame. On top of that, of course, this dataset is gathered from fleshandbloodonline.com, which is a great platform to play Flesh and Blood games at. If you want to help me to improve this dataset, you can hop on over to fleshandbloodonline.com to play some games in order to get more results into the system so I can get a better overview of what is top tier and what isn't. Of course, there are biases when using a dataset like this because there are no limitations to who can and cannot use this website. So in this case, it does mean that there are some players, especially newer players, that are skewing the dataset a little bit by not knowing how to play a hero and using this platform in order to learn the game. Fortunately, that's just a very small percentage. We've already made sure that people that concede a game early on are taken out of the dataset. But what that leaves us with is with a incredibly huge data set. Like if we look at this right here, FFXIV has over 2,000 games played. This is amazing data to get a proper overview of where Flesh and Blood is at right now, and on top of that we can have an overview of how the individual matchups are doing later on. So as of right now, with the current standings on the website, and keep in mind you should add or deduct like a couple of percentage on top of these win rates again to account for bad players navigating these decks and also good players facing against bad players and having a little bit higher win rate than they should. So, but if we look at the data here, we can see that FFXIV is sitting at almost a 60% win rate now. Previously, I believe we had them at 59%, so the win rate for FFXIV has remained somewhat stable. It's probably one of the better decks in the format. Personally, I think Briar is the current best deck in format simply because that deck has a little bit RNG involved than FFXIV, which is something that I did talk about in other videos as well on Patreon and stuff like that. We see that Dorinthea is doing quite well. However, it is important to keep in mind that Dorinthea's dataset is significantly smaller than the Runeblades. But at the same time, we have almost 1,000 data points and Dorinthea is sitting at a comfortable 57.9% win rate, which is very good, and we will have a look at the ins and outs of the specific matchups for that hero later on as well, because Dorinthea is definitely something we should explore more, and I think a lot of people are kind of underestimating this hero. I think Dorinthea might very well be an S tier hero soon, simply because we don't see as much Prism and Dromai anymore, which, well, Dromai wasn't really a bad matchup for her, but Prism definitely was, so maybe if you are up for some Dorinthea gameplay, it's definitely a deck that you should try out on fleshandbloodonline.com, also to help the dataset and stuff like that. So all team doing very well, over 55% win rate, definitely something to be expected. Same with Bravo. The thing about these decks, well, Bravo's a bit low at the moment, but the thing about the Guardian deck specifically is that they have a remarkably good matchup against Fai specifically. And for whatever reason, even though that Fai is underperforming, as you can see from the dataset right here, a lot of people are still navigating the deck. If we look at the calling in Singapore, there was a huge amount of Fai players. I think it's just a fan favorite deck, everybody enjoys playing it, and we might be seeing a lot of it at the Pro Tour and the calling in Lille as well, but we need to wait and see. But Guardian players, they have a very good time against this deck. They can very easily manipulate the win rate by forcing Fai to discard, because the moment they start discarding, their turns become a lot less scary, because they do rely on going wide as much as possible to get the most value out of things like Art of War and Spreading Flames. So if you can deny them that game plan, you're pretty much set to win. Prism sitting around a 50% win rate. Prism hasn't really been doing that well. Like, Prism is very close to hitting Living Legend, but there are quite a lot of heroes in the format right now that are gatekeeping her from getting there. One of the heroes, of course, being Fai, which is really, really popular. And I guess a lot of people are playing the Fai deck because they are hoping to pair into Prism matchups and stuff like that. But I don't know, well, while Fai is very good against the Prism, he is not the best against the Runeblades and the Guardian, so it's a bit of a weird meta game. Like, on the one hand, I'm happy though that people are now playing the decks that they enjoy playing rather than just playing the best deck straight up. Of course, there are a lot of people still playing things like Briar, which is arguably one of the best decks in the format, but You see a lot more people feeling comfortable now, probably because there's a lot more RNG involved in Flesh and Blood, to just play a hero they enjoy rather than just best hero in general or something, and I'm very happy to see. So Katsu sitting at a very clean 50%, perfectly balanced 50% win rate. We've seen Katsu was previously sitting, I believe, what was it, 54% or something. And at that time I also said that the data set for Katsu was kind of on the low side, which was kind of skewing his win rate favorably. Now that we see more people playing Katsu, we do see the win rate going down a bit, which is kind of to be expected. Dromai almost a 50% win rate, and then Dash of course winning a calling over in Singapore. It's not statistically not the best deck to navigate. However, like 46% win rate is still very respectable, and in a multi-level event where things like draft and such also play a huge role, you need to keep in mind you're going to be seeing these statistically improbable heroes to make it to the very top, which is something we also saw at the Battle Hardened this weekend, where we saw an Iyslander making it to the top. Of course, Icelander's win rate is probably a lot lower than it should be, simply because it requires a lot more skill and I would say wizard determination to navigate the deck properly. I'm a bit surprised to see Kano performing so poorly, but again, low data set and there might be a lot of new players navigating it. But overall, I feel the spread between the worst performing hero and the best performing hero is getting better and better each set. A big part of that is because LSS is selectively banning certain cards, but there's definitely a lot of improvement, which I'm very happy about. But let's just jump into some hero-specific matchup data to see how all the heroes are doing. One of the reasons you probably clicked on this video is to see how Dash is doing. So for Dash we have a relatively big data set, and we can see straight away she has a very favorable matchup against Prism specifically, which is one of the heroes that is still a deck to beat, I guess. There is still a significant amount of Prism players around, even though the amount of Prism players are a lot less than they used to be. But that's a very favorable matchup against Prism. It also has a favorable matchup against, let's see, Kano, which is another deck that requires quite a bit of skill to navigate, and a favorable matchup against Iyslander. But other than that, it seems that Dash kind of struggles against most of the top tier decks out there, including decks like Viceroy, Bravo, Briar, and Ulteam, who are abundantly present in most metas. We didn't see many Ulteams in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, but other than that, usually there are a lot of them around. And I feel it is really remarkable that a Dash player was able to make it to first place at the calling in Singapore, seeing how all the odds were kind of stacked against him. Of course, having draft being a part of the format was probably a huge help to make sure that the Dash player was even able to get into the top 8, but it's really a well-deserved victory to see like this underdog hero, I would almost call it, making it to the very top. And I think that's all what Flesh and Blood should be about, like playing the hero you like, playing it to its perfect skill cap or whatever you want to call it, and making it to the very top. That's just the TCG dream in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of people always net decking the best deck, and I'm very happy to see that somebody kind of thought outside the box, brought a super heavy aggro Dash deck to a big event, and I'm making it to the top anyways. With that said, let's have a look at what Fai is doing, and I'll be back in a second. So for Fai, unfortunately, ever since that the Stubby Hammers got banned, the deck is really underperforming quite heavily. We haven't really seen top 8 finishes with Fai all that much anymore. We did see, I think it's Ivan Teo in Singapore making a top 8 finish with a very strange version of Fai, running the Kodachis and having more of a mid-range build rather than an aggro build. Very fun deck, by the way. A lot of very cool interactions, like playing things like Blaze Headlong into a even bigger than that in order to give the thing go again, and still get a quicken token to give go again to the next attack as well. Really cool deck even, I'm definitely a fan of it. But overall, if we look at Fai, he has a very good win rate against pretty much every deck that is off meta, and then it has a horrible win rate against the decks that actually are meta, like Briar, Viceroy. Dorinthea to some extent is kind of becoming quite popular nowadays, has a bad matchup against that, and then the Guardians as well. So I do think that in time more and more players are going to stop playing this deck simply because all the matchups that they do face are kind of unfavorable. Like Fai was very good in the metas where Prism was around. He could very easily farm wins that way. As you can see, the win rate against Prism is very good for a Fai deck. But we're not in that kind of a meta anymore. We don't see Kanos anymore. We hardly see Iyslander as well. We did see Iyslander making it to first place at the calling, but it's very hard for a Fai player to really shine in the current format simply because we have rotated towards these Guardian and Runeblade decks as much as we have. Of course, that does mean that there is room in the meta to have like a bit of a turning wheel. We might see other decks that beat these decks go to the top, like for example Iyslander probably does quite well against these other decks, I would say, simply because she can't text them enough until they cannot really do anything. So there's definitely room for Fai to make a comeback in the future, I guess, but as for now I don't think it's the best deck to navigate. It's not going to stop people from playing it. It is a very, how to say, like there's a lot of people out there that really enjoy playing Fai, and I think we might continue seeing that, but we are going to see a bit of a drop-off in the near future. So if you are planning to stop playing something like Bravo that is specifically trying to prey on Fai players to get easy wins, I think you're gonna have a hard time because there's probably not gonna be as much Fai players in the near future. So I personally would advise against buying into a full-on Bravo deck at this point of time, simply because of that. You're likely much better off just investing in something like Viceroy or Briar, who are just good against pretty much everything. We've already went through the matchup win rates in the previous tier video. I'm not going to cover those again, but especially Briar has such a favorable matchup against pretty much anything in the meta. Not like a hugely swing in her favor matchups, like it's still sitting around like 60% for pretty much all heroes, or like 55 to 6% if I'm not mistaken, but they are just very good decks, and Fai just has too many weaknesses to really make it to the very top, which is why we don't see as many in the top 8 anymore, ever since that the Stubby Hammers got banned. But let's have a look at Iyslander, and then we will probably call the video, because I want to keep this a little bit shorter since I am preparing to go to the Pro Tour in Lille tomorrow, which means I still need to sleeve up my decks, make sure that there is no markings on my sleeves. Keep in mind, that's very important. Make sure you put your deck in a fresh pile of sleeves, otherwise you might get called out at a big event. So let's hop over to Iyslander, see how those matchups are doing. Alright, next up, Iyslander. So for Iyslander we see there are some very favorable matchups against Bolt and Kano and Levia, all of which are not all that present in the current meta, and a slightly favorable matchup against All Team. Against everything else though, it's not really doing that great from what I can tell. Against Briar, let's see, Briar 33%, that's very low. Against Fai, it's also not doing great. Against Viceroy, it's not doing great, so I'm not sure what to make of this data, because I've seen some very top players that do navigate this deck that are doing extremely well with it. The Battle Hardened is kind of proof of that, where Iyslander was able to make it to first place at that event. And we also had an Iyslander in the top 8 at the calling in Singapore as well. So I do think this deck has a lot of potential, and I believe that a lot of this lower win rate is likely more to contribute to player skill, that people don't really know how to play this deck optimally, that they don't know to do the whole Iyslander game plan, that you block with 2 cards and then use 3 cards during your opponent's turn, like 2 to play something from the arsenal, 1 to pitch, and then playing your weapon in order to keep 1 card left in hand to put back into the arsenal during your turn. I think people haven't really figured out the proper flow of disruption with this deck, like how to really utilize those frostbites and stuff like that, and that's really heavily reflecting in the win rate. Maybe I'm wrong, of course, maybe the data is correct and Iyslander in reality is just a very bad deck to navigate, but I think there's really potential for this deck as a heavy disruption control type of strategy. Of course, like most controls type of strategies, it can the gameplay can go south very fast because you're very dependent on being able to draw in the right consistencies, the right number of defense reaction, for example. You need to have an ice blue, you need to have another blue in order to pitch, so in terms of draw consistency, you can run into some troubles with Iyslander, but I think for the most part, if you have a very experienced player that is navigating a deck like Iyslander, you're gonna have a very good time with this deck. It has a very high skill cap, in my opinion, in Flesh and Blood terms at least, so give this deck a try. And for you experienced players out there, help to improve this dataset by showing the world what Iyslander is capable of. Go play some games on flashandbloodonline.com and let us see that Iyslander can do better than this, because this dataset, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just completely wrong. I would think that Iyslander would be able to disrupt things like Briar quite easily, and then seeing the 33% win rate, that's just strange data to me. Maybe I'm just biased for the deck, that I think the deck is good and actually it's not. But please, people, if you're good at Iyslander, go to flashandbloodonline.com and go play some games so we can see what it does in a week or two, even a month, once I do a big update for this again. Of course, I'm doing an update in 2 weeks actually, because next week I will be doing Blitz and the week after that I will be doing Iyslander again. So go play some games. That bottom line, go play some games so we can see how it is doing in a week or two. So lastly, we will go over Dorinthea and then we should really end the video, otherwise the video is just getting way too long. And let's just jump into that straight away. Alright, the last hero of today, Dorinthea. Of course, Dorinthea, like I said, has a very poor matchup against Prism, and by the looks of it also has a very poor matchup against Ultim, which is to be expected. Ultim can completely wall off her sword and deny her any of those +1 counters on the Dumbblade. For some reason we don't see as many of these, like even the dataset right there, you can see there's only 23 and 33 games played against these heroes, while against things like Fai there's almost twice the amount, in Ultim's case exactly twice the amount, and in Prism case even more than twice actually. So Dorinthea is doing quite well in the current meta, has a very good matchup against Dash, which is something good to see, I guess. I think now that Dash has won the calling in Singapore, I do think more people are going to be navigating the Dash deck, and because there's going to be more Dashes, there's also probably going to be less Prisms, because they cannot really win from Dash as far as I know. So I think that Dorinthea is really in a good position now to make it to the very top and to really push through, and pun intended, push through. But to really make it to the very top in the CC format, if you're a Dorinthea main, or you have been a Dorinthea main in the past, it's probably time to dust off your deck, because even against decks like Briar, it's a slightly favorable matchup. Against Bravo, it's favorable. We can see, where's Fitzroy at? Against Fitzroy, it's, well, it's slightly unfavorable, but I would say about 50-50, because 75 wins against 76 losses, that's about 50-50 in my book, especially if you add a little bit of variation with up and down with percentage win rates. So I think Dorinthea is definitely one of the better decks to navigate in the current format. I would highly suggest playing this deck if you can. I'm very tempted to even play it myself at the Pro Tour in Lille. Not sure if I will though. I am a Ninja main, of course. I tend to play Katsu or Fai at the moment. So I might just stick with the statistically worse deck just to be able to play what I enjoy playing. But Dorinthea is doing very well. I also see it with people that I'm coaching. I see it with people within my play group locally that are navigating this deck. It's really a good deck, definitely worth checking out. And with that said, I will leave you with this data. Feel free to pause and have a closer look at things as you please. As for me, I'm going to have to decide which deck I'm going to sleeve up for tomorrow, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you enjoyed the article over on FabFoundry.com if that's where you found this video. And of course, for most of these decks, I have a optimized deck available on my Patreon, patreon.com/Kugane Gaming, where I can use all the support I can get to keep on doing this content indefinitely. And if you want to support me by buying something like a playmat, you can do so on KuganeGaming.com as well. With that said, take care.